I never pictured a simple disagreement over pool hours ending with me explaining myself to two cops in my own backyard. But there I was, squinting in the sun, trying to play it cool while the HOA president, Karen, stood on my patio, pointing at me with this smug, triumphant look on her face. He's the one, officer. He's been breaking the rules all week. Right then, I knew this whole thing had flown completely off the rails. It was absurd, humiliating, and honestly infuriating. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have planned for, was the ace I had up my sleeve. The one little piece of information that was about to flip this entire situation upside down. Let me start from the beginning so you can see how this whole nightmare even started. It all kicked off with a dream. My family and I had finally saved up enough to buy a house in what we thought was the perfect neighborhood. You know, the type: manicured lawns, a park for the kids, and a beautiful community pool that just sparkled. It was straight out of a brochure. Of course, it came with a homeowners association and HOA. I'd heard the horror stories, but hey, I'm a reasonable guy. I actually read the binder thick with covenants, conditions, and restrictions before we signed anything. The rules seemed pretty standard. Keep your lawn mowed, don't paint your house an insane color, the usual. Nothing prepared me for the people, specifically the HOA president. Let's just call her Karen. Karen was a woman who seemed to be born with a clipboard in one hand and a fiery need to enforce rules, no matter how small, in the other. She was probably in her late 50s, with a haircut you could set your watch by and eyes that were constantly scanning for violations. She didn't walk. She patrolled. For the first few months, our interactions were basically nothing. A stiff nod here, a pointed glare at my recycling bin that was out an hour too long there. I just wrote her off as being a little overzealous and did my best to stay off her radar. My goal was simple: pay my dues, use the things I was paying for, and live a quiet life. Unfortunately, Karen had other ideas. The community pool was the neighborhood's crown jewel, which also made it Karen's personal kingdom. She was known to sit in a lounge chair for hours, not to relax, but to watch. She'd check key cards, maybe measure the length of someone's swim trunks, and scrutinize guests like a TSA agent having a bad day. Most of us just learned to live with it, rolling our eyes and trying to time our swims for when she wasn't around. I thought I could do the same. I was wrong. The first real shot across the bow came in early July. My sister and her two young kids, 5 and 7, were visiting from out of state. It was a blistering hot day, and the first thing my niece asked was, "Can we go to the pool?" Of course, I said yes. That's half the reason we moved here. We grabbed our towels, sunscreen, and floaties and made our way down. The kids were beside themselves, splashing in the shallow end while my sister and I relaxed on a nearby lounge chair. It was perfect, for about 15 minutes. Then Karen's shadow fell over us. "I don't recognize your guests," she said. No hello, no introduction. Her tone wasn't curious. It was an accusation. I put on a smile, trying to be friendly. "Oh, this is my sister, Sarah, and my niece and nephew. They're just visiting for the week." Karen's face was a mask of stone. The bylaws state that all non-resident guests must be approved by the board 24 hours in advance. I was floored. I'd read the rules, but I sure didn't remember anything that intense. "I think you might be mistaken," I said, keeping my voice polite. "I'm pretty sure the rule is about preventing huge, unchaperoned parties. This is just my sister and her kids for the afternoon." "A rule is a rule," she snapped. "They are not residents. They need to leave." She pointed a finger toward the gate. My 5-year-old niece, who was just giggling a second ago, looked up with these wide, confused eyes, clutching her little unicorn floa tie. That was the moment my patience snapped. I wasn't going to let my family get kicked out of a pool I pay for because of a ridiculous power trip. I stood up. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We're not leaving. They're my guests, and they are welcome here." Karen's eyes narrowed. She whipped out a little notepad, scribbled down my house number, and muttered, "You'll be hearing from the board." Then she spun around and marched off. The whole vibe was ruined. We left a few minutes later, the kids asking me why the mean lady was so mad. I really didn't have a good answer for them. True to her word, A crisp white envelope was taped to my front door 2 days later. Inside was an official violation notice for an unauthorized guest infraction, complete with a $50 fine. I was livid. This wasn't about a rule. This was about power. This was Karen showing me who was boss because I dared to question her. I refused to just pay it. I knew if this was going to turn into something, I needed a paper trail. So, I sat down and wrote a calm, professional email to the entire HOA board. I laid out what happened, quoted the exact bylaw from our HOA documents, and argued that any reasonable person would see the rule was meant to stop someone from throwing a kegger, not to ban a resident sister and 2 small children from taking a dip. I asked them to drop the fine and clarify the rule for everyone. The reply I got a week later was a total slap in the face. It was a short, condescending email, clearly written by Karen but signed by the board, that said their interpretation was final. The fine stood, and if I didn't pay it in 30 days, it would double. That's when I knew this was going to be a fight. So I started to get smart. I saved every single email. I took a time-stamped photo of the pool rules sign, and I started noticing Karen's behavior getting worse. I'd see her car driving slowly past my house. When I was out doing yard work, she'd just stand on the sidewalk and watch me. One evening, my kids and I were at the pool, and we stayed maybe 5 minutes past the 8 p.m. closing time while I gathered our stuff. I looked up and saw Karen by the gate, her phone out, blatantly taking pictures of me. The next day, you guessed it, another violation notice. This time, $100 for after-hours pool use. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was a targeted campaign of harassment. Have you ever had to deal with a neighbor or an HOA board member who was on a personal power trip like this? It is one of the most frustrating things in the world. Tell me your story in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to read them. After 2 months of this garbage, with fines piling up and letters threatening a lien on my property, I'd had enough. I wasn't going to be bullied. I paid thousands of dollars to live here, and I wasn't going to be chased out of the amenities I was entitled to. So I decided I was done hiding. The next Saturday, I called my sister. Hey, can you and the kids come over? We're going to the pool. I could hear her hesitate. Are you sure? I don't want to make things worse for you. I am absolutely sure, I told her. This isn't about you. This is about the principle of the thing. Just come and have fun. I'll handle Karen. We walked to the pool like a family on a mission. We set up our towels, the kids jumped in, and we just acted like a normal family enjoying a summer day. We weren't loud, we weren't disruptive. It took exactly 22 minutes for Karen to appear. She marched right up to me, her face flushed red with anger. I thought I made myself clear, she hissed. These people are not permitted here. I'm ordering you to leave. Now. This time, I didn't even get up. I just looked up at her from my lounge chair and said, calmly and clearly, Karen, they are my family. I am a homeowner in good standing, and this pool is a shared amenity. We are not leaving. I am the president of this association. You will do as I say, she shouted. Other families started to stop and stare. Your title doesn't give you the right to harass my family. I shot back, keeping my voice steady. That's it, she shrieked, pulling out her phone. I am calling the police. I'm going to have all of you arrested for trespassing. And she actually did it. She stood there, her back to me, telling the dispatcher that a resident was hosting an unauthorized event and refusing to remove his trespassing guests. I just watched, feeling this strange sense of calm. This was it, the big showdown, and I was ready. Which brings us right back to the beginning. 2 police officers show up, looking exactly as thrilled as you'd expect to be mediating a suburban pool fight on a Saturday. Karen rushes over to them and launches into this dramatic story of how I break all the rules and defy her authority. And his guests are trespassing. I want them removed from the property right now, she finished, pointing a shaky, accusing finger at my sister. The officers listened patiently. Then one of them turned to me. Sir, what's your side of it? This was my moment. I stood up and calmly explained everything from the start. That this was my sister and her kids, and that this was the end of a months-long harassment campaign from the HOA president. Behind the officer, I could see Karen smirking, already tasting victory. And I continued, pulling out my phone. The issue here isn't just a petty squabble. After the first fine, I got worried about potential discrimination. I'd read that federal laws, like the Fair Housing Act, have protections regarding familial status. And I was concerned that aggressively blocking a resident from having his immediate family visit could get the HOA into hot water. The officers looked interested, but Karen just scoffed. That's ridiculous. This is private property. We have rules. I'm glad you brought that up, I said, swiping on my phone. You see, because I was concerned, I sent a formal question to the HOA's official management company, the one your board pays for legal advice, asking for clarification on this exact guest policy. And it seems I got BCC'd on the response chain by mistake. I kept going. I have an email right here, sent from your own legal advisors to the entire HOA board. In it, they state, and I'm quoting, "Enforcement of this policy against family members is legally precarious and could expose the association to a discrimination lawsuit. We advise you to cease this specific enforcement and revise the policy immediately." I turned my phone screen to the officers. There it was in black and white. Legal advice that Karen had received weeks ago and had deliberately ignored. She wasn't enforcing a rule. She was knowingly going against the advice of her own lawyers. The lead officer read the email. Then he read it again. He glanced at his partner. Then he looked at Karen, whose triumphant smirk had completely melted into a pale, slack-jawed expression of pure shock. "Ma'am," the officer said, his tone suddenly cold and official. "This is a civil matter. Not only is there no criminal trespass here, but it looks like you're acting directly against the advice of your own counsel. We will not be removing this family. I suggest you take this up with your board and your lawyers." He gave me a nod. "Have a good day, sir." Then they both turned and walked away. The silence that followed was deafening. Every neighbor who had been watching this soap opera unfold had heard everything. Karen stood frozen for a second, her face a mix of raw fury and total humiliation. Without another word, she turned and practically fled from the pool deck. My family and I stayed, and for the first time in months we actually enjoyed the pool in peace. But I wasn't finished. The next week was the monthly HOA meeting. I showed up early with 20 printed copies of that email. When the floor opened for homeowner comments, I stood up and calmly told the entire story to the whole neighborhood. I detailed the harassment, the fines, and the president's conscious decision to ignore legal advice, exposing every single one of us to a potential lawsuit. You could have heard a pin drop. And then the questions started, not for me but for the board. People I'd never even met started speaking up, sharing their own stories of Karen's overreach. The fallout was swift. Facing a homeowner rebellion, the rest of the board held an emergency session. Karen was removed as president by a unanimous vote of no confidence. A week later, she resigned from the board entirely. The very next day, I got a formal letter of apology from the new board, confirming all fines against me were gone. And 2 months after that, a new, clearly worded, and legally vetted pool guest policy was mailed to every single resident. It was a long, stressful fight, but in the end, a little bit of knowledge and a solid paper trail made all the difference. If you enjoyed seeing a little justice served, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. It really helps the channel grow and tells the algorithm that you want to see more content like this. It's funny. The whole thing feels almost surreal now. It was never really just about a pool. It was about standing up to a bully who was drunk on a tiny sip of power. It really proves that when you live in a community with an HOA, you have to know your rights. Document everything, put it in writing, and don't ever be afraid to push back when you know you're in the right. Living in a community should be about making it a great place for everyone, not about feeding one person's ego. Justice can win, but sometimes you have to be willing to get in the ring and fight for it. What's the most creative way you've ever solved a persistent problem? I'd love to read your own stories of victory, big or small, in the comments. Thanks for watching.